Welcome to the Common Cool podcast,
where we discuss the power of addiction,
the art of suffering,
and the joy of freedom.
Welcome to the Calm and Cool podcast. My name is Miguel.
And I'm Jeff.
And we're here with our new guest. His name is Rick Green. He's a very, very interesting guy. He's doing some very interesting things that we're going to get into. He's the founder of an organization called Precision Recovery, and we'll dive into what that is and what they do. But without further ado, I'll introduce our guest and have him just give you a little personal introduction of who he is and how he got into this journey of precision recovery.
Well, thanks, Miguel. Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here. How did I get into precision recovery? Well, a little about me. My licensing, I'm a licensed therapist in the state of Texas, and I specialize in chemical dependency. I really came about this as a second career. My main career was in pharma and in biotech for 20 to 30 years. I worked in different projects, different companies. Like I said, we all become Pfizer in the end. They buy out everybody in the end. So we get a lot of, what company did you work for? And I'm like, all of them, because they all get bought out by the other. But as a second career, ended up in chemical dependency treatment, chemical dependency counseling. And in the recovery world, we just call it a God thing. Something just beyond statistical probability happens. I just kept getting repeat felony DWI offenders, not 3 times, which is where the felony laws kick in Texas, but 4, 5. The patient 0 had 10 DWIs. And these were not what you would think of as your typical criminal, quote unquote, the stereotypical criminal. They didn't have mens res, the Latin term, not a criminal mindset. They tended to be very responsible, very careful, somewhat anxious and hypervigilant, but they often, when they drank too much, and then they would get behind the wheel of a car and just had no ability to explain why this had happened. And again, not once or twice or 3 or 4 times, 5 to 10 times. And so it was quite a puzzle. Unfortunately, there's very little help for them other than just traditional treatment. Many had, due to being arrested and then having to be dry for their condition of their bond, didn't meet the criteria for residential treatment. So many of them went to intensive outpatient programs, and that was really about it. They seemed a little different than your typical alcohol use disorder patient in an IOP. So what we found was that sometimes when they drank, they would drink what they intended to drink. Other times when they drank, they ended up drinking way more than they intended to drink. And the other thing we found is that the fear just went away. They couldn't explain it. They would always say, I made a mistake. I screwed up. They really couldn't explain why they had done this over and over and over again. Other than having a strong emotional attachment to alcohol, there was something there that caused them to not be able to identify the risks or care about the consequences at the time of the incident. So, and then the other thing is that if they've been caught 8 times, they've probably done it 1,000 or hundreds, So this is probably a lot more prevalent of a behavior than the consequences are stacking up. So, we started investigating it and figuring out what to do. The other issue is of many, many therapists, and I completely understand, and I don't in any way ever recommend anybody in the healthcare profession go into testifying in court and helping with legal preparation. It's always been natural to me. I have been involved in so many legal cases in my life, especially in pharma. Again, the biggest lawsuit ever, or the biggest fine FDA's ever delivered, was with the drug I was involved with. To me, it's no big deal. I'm had business law courses, know what I'm doing. And, I started actually testifying on their behalf and doing forensic evaluations on them specific to alcohol use. And that was a great help as well. So many forensic psychologists and forensic therapists aren't trained on substance use disorder. and they struggle to really be able to present the story of where the patient is and what's going on. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah. So when did you become an addiction therapist? At what point? How did that come into play?
Actually, late in life. So I think my license is January 8th of 2015.
Okay.
So relatively new to the field compared to many of my colleagues.
They had the genetics background and the pharma background and decided to become a therapist.
That's where things, this again is so strange. So, I'm in recovery myself. And so when I walked out of treatment, I absolutely positively did not understand what had happened. And no one could explain it to me. And the only other person I have ever met who had this burning issue, it was really, I don't want to say sobriety threatening, but it definitely was interfering with the process, didn't understand the disease model. No one who had explained it correctly. They had explained the disease, the active disease, but no one explained how did we get to that, right? I mean, I can explain a broken leg, but how did the leg get broken? Why did that particular bone get broken? No one was explaining that. And so I, walked out of rehab trying to find that answer, didn't find it. One of the big reasons I went back to school, to get into this profession was to try to get that answer. None of the professors could answer it. Every program director I worked with, they would try to answer it. I was like, really? It just wasn't important to them. What was important was that treatment worked and recovery happens. And I totally respect that and I get that. But for me, the question of why, what happened and why does this work? Why when we treat this, does this work? And the other thing that really scared me too was right from the beginning, I saw people who never got sober. I saw people who relapsed and died.
Mm-hmm.
One bad thing about being in recovery, and it's just the truth that's going to happen to us all, is that if you're in recovery, you're going to meet people and you're going to like them. You're going to feel attached to them and they're going to die from this disease. And there's no way around it.
As a therapist, I'm a therapist. I've been working with addicts for a long time. And, one of the things that a lot of clients hold as like an important factor of therapy is that their therapists be in recovery themselves. And it's one of those things where it's, I'm always at that place where it's like, well, I've worked with schizophrenics and I'm not a schizophrenic, but the idea is like, I think that there's that place, like that mystery in that middle, like where you get to that place where it's like I don't get it. Like my heart wants to not drink. Like every part of me wants to not drink. And then I drink. Like there's something that that phenomena that like changes, and like knowing that phenomena and knowing the consequence, the misery of the consequences too. It's like that. Is that what you're trying to say? Like the unexplained part of like just that.
The unexplained part. And I didn't really know the success rate. I hadn't been exposed to John Kelly's data. That wasn't shown in school. The fact that 60% of people with substance use disorder, achieve sobriety, achieve sustained remission before they die. I didn't know that. I was under the impression maybe, I'd seen data that 8% of people with substance use disorder get in sustained remission. I was like, this is crazy.
You say a point because I think it's a myth that it's like inverted, right? I think the popular knowledge sort of points to the opposite, that the percentage is much less.
And that kept me out of recovery. That kept me out of trying, thinking, well, it's such a low percentage. What is the point? Let's wait on this as long as possible. I knew where I was headed for years. I probably had 18 to 10 years where I met the criteria, but just survived. I just thought, well, this is just how it is. It's not, treatment doesn't work. No one knows why this happened. This is a moral failing. All of the stereotypes that you hear and you see on Reddit of people who've been hurt by addicts and alcoholics who just destroy people, what they say in their comments. I believe, I get it. I had been hurt by, alcoholics and addicts myself, but, and I believed it, but it's really sad because, 60% do attain remission, but honestly, that's not high enough. We can do better. I wish there was like a Manhattan Project of, and it'd have to be in the United States. We're the only country crazy enough to try to pull something like that off, where we get together, get the best and brightest, and just sit down till we figure out what in the world's going on and how to treat this. It's not going to be a purely medical or scientific answer too. It's going to be an integrated approach, and that doesn't fit well in a lot of models of diseases, but this one is.
Right. So let me ask you a question. So first of all, I mean, you've gone through an amazing journey, and thanks for what you've offered so far from that journey. In precision recovery, so what has you learned about the disease of addiction in this part of your journey? Like, what are the top things?
So the genetic component is probably the biggest learning and the biggest game changer, and it's getting traction now. But the first gene that was associated with addiction, and when I say addiction, I mean alcoholism too. I use those words interchangeably. And substance use disorder. And when we say substance use disorder, I really mean substance use disorder, severe, not mild. It was discovered that gene with the dopamine DRD2 gene was discovered in 1990. So we've been on this journey for a very long time. Now technology has definitely increased at an exponential rate that I can barely even believe, but that has really been the game changer. So this is how strange this is, my journey. So I realized early on in counseling, one of the biggest issues that if people ask me, a lot of therapists or journalists will ask me like, well, what's the difference in addiction counseling? It's like, we don't meet them where they are, and they look all strange. This is not a Rogerian approach. We meet them where they are. They're drunk. We have to take them where they're going pretty darn quickly. And it's a different approach, and everybody has different techniques, but, number thing we have to overcome is denial. You don't usually have to do that with somebody who has depression or anxiety or some other neuroses. They're coming to the therapist looking for help. A lot of people who come for substance use disorder help, they're in denial on levels and strange twists and contortions of their brain that it's very difficult to explain. And so getting through denial is very difficult when we had no physiological biomarker to say, look, this is an issue. I've seen denial in cancer. I've seen patients come out with a liquid tumor type and say, absolutely no, doctor, there's no way, your test is wrong. And the doctor's holding up the vial of blood going, look, it's orange. That's white blood cells turning your blood orange. You can see it. And they're still like, no, it has to be wrong. The cancer can't be back. So denial happens in all diseases, but we don't even have a test tube to hold that. We see brain scans. Nora Volkoff, the director of the National Institute of Drug, is it abuse? National Institute of Drug, NIDA. Why am I forgetting what it is, Jeff? National Institute of Drug. I hope it's not abuse. Anyway, we're not supposed to use those words anymore. Bad messaging. But she made her career on functional MRI studies and substance use disorder, yet Jeff and I can't order that test. I've talked to neuroradiologists who are like, yeah, I've seen those. I don't know how to run them. My MRI machines don't have the software that will do it. I did have contact with Ida and I asked him, I said, can you put a white paper out there on how neuroradiologists can copy what you've done? And that never happened either. So, we don't have a biomarker in any type to say, look, this is what's physiologically different than you. I've found the strongest tool for dealing with denial is the genes. And so what's really strange is the first gene that was associated with substance use disorder was actually found at the University of Texas Health Science Center here in San Antonio. And Ken Blum, Ken, like I say all the time, he's the great grandfather that I always wanted and never had. I'm really privileged to get to know him and work with him and publish some papers with him. he discovered that gene, and using gel technology in 1990, it was like finding a needle in a haystack. And from there, he went on by 2013 to develop something called the Genetic Addiction Risk Score test. And this test is very predictive of somebody's predisposition to develop different types of addictions and neuroses and psychiatric issues and even personality traits.
And how does one go about taking that test? What is needed? Like if I wanted to take that test, what do I have to do?
It's really sad right now. So right now the test isn't available because the company that it was owned by the rights to the test were owned by a lab, and where the rights exactly exist now is unknown. Maybe Ken does, maybe the former owners of the company, but that company went out of business. And when they went out of business, the test was no longer offered. I can do it because what I do is I get all of my patients' genome sequence. So we sequence the whole genome, and then I can go back and look at 23 different alleles to determine what their GARS score is and what those alleles are associated. We can also look at other behavioral genetics.
Mm-hmm. So can you explain what alleles are?
So that's how we do it right now. You literally have to get your whole genome sequence and then look for the genes and the haplotypes. Haplotypes are groups of genes or groups of alleles that are predictive with different disorders.
That's awesome. I do that. And so a question I'll squeeze in there related to that is, so if somebody comes to Precision Recovery, what does the whole program look like? You know, do you start always with the genetics tests? And if yes or no, and once you get that test back, like how do you proceed? How do you incorporate it into the treatment of the person?
Yeah, we're very specific on what we treat. So the first qualification is there has to be a felony driving while intoxicated charge. That's qualifier number one. Number two is they do have to have a GARS score of 6 or higher before we'll let them into the program. We've had people that have low GARS scores, and the more and more testing we did, we found out this was just episodic or binge or oppositional defiant disorder. Some other pathology you could say was there, some conduct disorder, but it wasn't what we specialize in treating, and we refer them to somebody else. We don't just cut them off and say goodbye. We'll also accept people with professional licensing issues, because our program is really based on the airline pilot SIMS program. So those are our two patient populations. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have people with professional licensing issues and felony DWIs. So, so that's how we can go in and explain to the court that this is a genetically driven brain disease more than a moral failing or a character issue. So the court then, okay, good to know. Then the second question is, so why should we give them a chance to get it right if this is genetically driven and possibly unfixable? Like, no, it's very fixable. We just need long-term treatment and monitoring. And those programs that, are run 3 to 5 years, like the pilot SIMS program, like many of the physicians programs in different states, some of the nurses programs, they have very, very high success rates because of the long-term treatment and monitoring accountability. So that's our 1-2 punch. We explain to the court what happened, and then we offer the solution. And it's worked very well. We've never had anybody revoked. We've never had anybody revoked from bond or revoked from probation. That's our goal. But by the way, I should say too, our goal is not to find a non-guilty verdict. As far as the way the laws are written, the person is guilty. There would have to be a change in jurisprudence or doctrine and before, or the law before somebody could have a non-guilty verdict due to genetic data or disease. And in Texas, regardless of the cause, you're pretty guilty when you're guilty. There aren't many affirmative defenses. I've never seen an affirmative defense allowed in Texas, honestly. So, they're guilty. They've been, what are we supposed to say? Oh, they weren't guilty the 4 times before, but they're guilty. They're not guilty now on number 5. What we're trying to do is get a probation sentence with high accountability and treatment and monitoring.
This is super interesting. I actually about I don't know, like 15 years ago, I worked at a therapeutic community, through the, addiction research treatment services through the University of Colorado, for people in, Department of Corrections. And I know that there were people that went out to the prisons and spent a lot of time doing that differentiation that you're talking about, differentiating the people who are just like have an addiction issue compared to the people who have more antisocial traits, and just trying to figure out like which is which, because the people that you're talking about, these people that just like are not antisocial people, they're not, violent people. They're not, teasing them out so they could take advantage of the therapeutic community. So they could be transferred as inmates to this community, which is out in the public. But having that test, that test was never available. Like there was no test that would have helped make that decision. Like what are we dealing with here? And to like differentiate the two populations in a way. Cause they did a lot of face-to-face time with them. But I think I'm just starting to think about ideas where this could help,
This is fascinating. So, I should tell you this too. So when I worked for the company, I actually went to work for the company that, owned the GARS test. And so we applied to the CDC for a ICD-11 code for a new disease, a new disorder. If you look up reward deficiency syndrome, there's been probably 200 or 300 studies, or papers published on the idea of reward deficiency syndrome. It's dopamine gene driven issues with the reward system is really what it is. If you're going to talk a little more scientifically, we changed it at the recommendation of CDC to dopamine reward system disorder versus reward deficiency syndrome. We changed it to dopamine reward system disorder. We filed with CDC. We had Kareem Washington from Howard University and Michael Sprintz, who's on several boards with the American Society of Addiction Medicine. We got together and we did this application, and CDC accepted the application, and they realized there was really something here to this genetically driven behavioral issues. And they're like, we're going to have to turn this over to the DSM committee. So it's sitting with the DSM committee somewhere, Jeff, before you'll be able to diagnose.
I got to keep using the same ways to figure it out myself. Yeah.
This is strange. This is the sequelae of reward deficiency syndrome or dopamine reward system disorder. So if we can diagnose the key cause, then we can go from there and have the subsequent sequelae or other diseases disorders that are associated with it. But it says in our license in the state of Texas, that's what we treat. We treat reward deficiency syndrome and alcohol use disorder and substance use disorder and other mental issues as sequelae thereof. And state let it go. So they're like, well, we're trying. And the reason we're doing that is we're trying to get more groups. Like it's in the SAGE Encyclopedia of Psychiatric Disorders. We're trying to get more groups to recognize the genetically driven brain disease. And truth be told, if you haven't figured it out right now, I strongly believe there are really two types of addiction. There are people with a strong genetic burden, and substances become very rewarding for them. And that's true, for lack of a better term, true addiction, true alcohol use disorder. And then there's people that don't have a high genetic burden, but maybe use substances a lot. I call that pseudo addiction, maybe. I've seen those patients, especially when I was working in pain medicine. We'd detox them from opiates, huge amounts they've been taking for a long time, and they didn't act like addicts. They weren't drug seeking. They weren't craving. They weren't emotionally dysregulated. The patients with the high genetic burden weren't. They were very emotionally dysregulated after detoxing from opiates. Their pain was better, but nothing else was better.
And would you say that it could be these same people that also look for very intense sort of activities like, intense sports and things of that nature like you're looking for dopamine just in any way that you can get it, not necessarily through a drug only.
Yeah. Thrill-seeking behavior was one of the first personality traits for people with reward deficiency syndrome that researchers identified. Novelty-seeking, thrill-seeking, risk-taking. These have been associated with the COMT gene, other genes. Yeah, absolutely. The disorders and the personality traits and characteristics that can come from these genes feels like it's endless, but I think there's about 27 total.
Which is probably why a classic addict, like a real addict, is so propense to create chaos in their own life, because, you know, you're kind of looking to feed your brain with those chemicals that your brain itself produces that you're addicted to, right? So you tend to look for intense situations, chaotic situations, and you create these turmoils for yourself because you sort of need that.
I'm Miguel. I've done this with so many groups. So I'll be sitting there with an addict. I'll say, this exercise, this group exercise. I'll say, okay, there's 8 people here. Okay. Out in the parking lot, 50 feet away are 8 people, exact same size and sex as you. They've got clubs and shields. They're coming this way. What do you do? And immediately you'll see them looking around, and then someone will go into an action step immediately without even planning. They're telling you what they're going to do, which is counterattack. They're looking around the room for weapons. It's 100% of the time. I'll do that same group with the families, and they're looking around. I'm saying, what are you looking for? And they're like, the exit or the lock.
Miguel and I were talking about that the other day when it came to that warrior stance that you were talking about.
I mean, I'm talking little tiny meek grandmothers are going to war. And they'll talk about it. I mean, I can talk, you've probably seen it a million times. When the proverbial S hits the fan, things slow down for me. I'm in my element. I'm processing information at a rate that is crazy. And I'm coming to, action faster than normal people can keep up with me. And it took me a long time to really admit this in myself and realize I'm running over people a lot. I've got to slow down. People don't process and do that. That's not normal. That's going to be 10%, maybe 20% of the population that do that. And it's who we are. And you can see how that would be pro-adaptive. You need these people in your society to attack while the others get away.
Right. Well, and it's interesting you should say that. Well, you just said, we had one of our guests who was a neuroscientist, and we didn't go too deep into this, but I asked the question, is there anything adaptive about, being an addict? Because it feels like if it wasn't, we wouldn't continue to have addicts or, to this level anyway. So there seems to be like, there is something adaptive around being an addict or about having the addict gene.
I have no data to back this up. Probably the leader in evolutionary psychology is the University of Texas, Dr. Buss. I have not talked to him. I would love to talk to him about this. I think this would be a great book or doctoral thesis. I am sure that these genes are pro-adaptive, or they would have worked their way out of the gene pool. So I think you, Miguel, and I talked about this. I was like, when you look at where, and again, this is where science gets in the way of political correctness. So please, everybody who's woke and political correct, I'm so sorry. Please let me just state facts. When you look for high incidences of alcoholism, because that's the drug we track the most and have the most data on, where you stereotypically see countries that have a problem with alcohol and alcoholism, it's real. The stereotypes are real. So you see it in Ireland, you see it through North England, you see it across into Scandinavia, down into Germany, down into the former Soviet states. And all the millennials just said, what are the Soviet states? And into Russia. And that's pretty much it. You don't see the issues with alcoholism and alcohol use disorder in Africa, Mediterranean, Asia. And then there's this one other population that you see it. And that's in indigenous Americans, we call them, American Indians. It's weird. What in the world would American Indians, right from the beginning, as soon as the explorers got here, they remarked at the issues that the indigenous people had with alcohol. Like, what in the world would all those cultures have in common? And I think the common thread is war, genocide, and famine. You know, when the explorers got to the New World, they're like, where are all the people? Well, famine and disease seems to have taken out a lot, and they were always at war. That's well documented into their almost extinction, always at war with each other. And then you look at Europe, it's just a bizarre continent. If you've ever think about it, what other continent on the planet has a stone fort every 60 to 100 miles, maybe even every 20 miles? It's very difficult to make a stone fort without power tools. It's hard to do with power tools. Why is this continent just full of stone forts? Because it was constantly under war, genocide, and famine. So I think that these genes that make it difficult to find reward in things and make us very hypervigilant of negative things, bad things, help us find supplies and plans and ways that help us survive war, genocide, and famine.
Yeah. And it's, and I have just like not any formal data, but just from my own life data. I'm also a recovering addict. So I have a lot of friends that are in recovery. And what I notice is that when we get together to get on a mission for something, everybody gets super intense. It's like, yeah, let's go. I'll do this. And movement happens very fast.
Right.
Like a friend of mine was trying to get a few people to garden together so we can grow our own food. And man, it took like 10 minutes for like people to arrive there at her house, and they were already examining the land, or all right, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And that situations like that just get me thinking about what we're talking about, which is like, hey, it feels like there's sort of like this warrior gene, right? That is right in line with the addict gene. And if you have a lineage, and it's hard to know if you do or not, but if you have a lineage of, you know, that sort of person of warriors, you come to this world and you're just completely bored in a sense, right? Because we're not fighting any wars. We're not even growing our own food. So what do? You go look for drugs and alcohol, right? And that gives you your fix in some ways.
Yeah. I find life to be horribly boring. I have to constantly entertain myself. Have since I was born. It's just took me a while to admit it, but like, this is tedious and boring. There's got to be a better way to do this. I've got to be interested in it. But it's, you know, Jeff mentioned about, people in recovery thinking that their caregivers have to be in recovery. I don't think that. I think that anybody who can empathize and study and really learn about the population, how they think and how they work in general, can be a very effective caregiver. I've seen that often with doctors, and I'm seeing it with therapists too. It may take 5 years to get there, but you can get there. I truly do believe that. But it's really funny to watch staff at a treatment center that aren't in recovery observe that behavior you described, putting Miguel with the patients, you know, that they get together and just work in unison. Like, it's scary to outsiders. I'm like, oh yeah, of course they're building a garden. It'll take them a few hours and they'll be done. I'm like, what?
Yeah. But once you lose their attention, like, you know, once things get a little mixed up, everyone's just like, okay, I'm out of here.
Yeah, man. And then they might abandon it too.
Well, it was really easy to get people there for the first session. It was harder to get them to go back.
Right. And the novelty wore off, and then, yeah, it's crazy. You know, I should probably mention like people that we didn't talk about. So people have these genes, and what do these genes mean? And I realize I've been talking past a lot of patients, even in my colleagues, that what do these genes do? And specifically, the genes we're looking at mostly affect the dopamine reward system. Now, in the dopamine reward cascade, you have many neurochemicals in there: serotonin, endorphins, enkephalins, GABA, glutamate, even norepinephrine, noradrenaline, even endocannabinoids. There's a whole cascade of neurochemicals and transmitters that interact with them, where you end up with the dopamine spike or the dopamine reward. But dopamine doesn't really produce the feeling of reward. It produces the anticipation of reward. When it's low, you get negative emotionality. When it's high, you usually get anticipation of reward or anticipation of something dramatic, something beyond normal. The reward really comes in the endorphin or enkephalin, the natural opioid cascade that happens after the dopamine. So dopamine's about what I say all the time. If you had a really good Christmas mornings when you were a little kid, because some people didn't, unfortunately, that anticipation of Christmas morning, tearing open the presents, that's the dopamine. The reward is Christmas afternoon, playing with your new toys, eating cookies, just everything's right with the world. That's kind of different. What these genes do is usually affect the neurotransmitter's ability to process the neurochemical, or affect the neurochemical's production, or affect its transport. And like I said, it could be on any of the genes or any of the receptors or any of the chemicals involved in the reward cascade. But when you see these disruptions in it, it's not that the system doesn't work. It just doesn't work very, quote unquote, well compared to a normal person. So Ken wrote a beautiful paper about it. Like one day he just wrote like almost like an I don't know, like an op-ed piece about what does it feel like to have severe reward deficiency syndrome? And really simply, it's very easy to feel negative emotion, and the negative emotion tends to linger and stay. So in the 12-step world, we talk about resentments. Wow. Lingering resentments. I even saw it 89 years ago. Then it's difficult. It's easy to feel negative emotion, and negative emotion tends to stay longer. So I say all the time, there's no molehills, only mountains. And then it's difficult to get excited and up for things. And then when they happen, it's difficult to feel a reward, and the reward is very fleeting. So what most normal people who heard this, they're just like, oh yeah, I know somebody like that.
Right. For sure.
It's like, are they a bad person? Are they a curmudgeon? No, that's the way they were born. They have to take action every day to feel okay. It's not going to come naturally. I say this all the time. Like, they don't watch Dancing with the Stars. That's not going to do it for them. Never met anybody in recovery who watched Dancing with the Stars. Now that show makes great money and has great big audience, male and female alike. Tons of ratings, but it doesn't do it. It better be Game of Thrones final episode. It's got to be really over the top and something amazing for somebody with reward deficiency syndrome or dopamine reward system disorder to feel okay, to feel the same.
And what are some of the interventions that work best for these kinds of people that have a reward deficiency?
Yeah, if you Google, so Ken came up with different supplements, and at least in the United States, they're supplements. If you're watching this overseas, they actually might be more, especially Germany, might be more like a prescription item. But he found different supplements that actually help depending on the specific genetic variants that the people with reward deficiency syndrome carry. So many respond to DNL-phenylalanine, which is a polymer that increases dopamine production, dopamine availability. N-acetylcysteine, I think that works more on glutamate, but there's question to that. There's a different blends of that. Now, there's a psychiatrist who I've never met, but one of his colleagues, Jeff Sandos, who I've worked very closely with, and we've done presentations together. He's come out with a new book too. He'd be a great person for you guys to interview. He's at Troy University. But Von Steve looks at genetic history. He doesn't do the genetic tests, and then he matches certain medications with the issue. It's more GABA oriented. He uses medications that work on the GABA system. More serotonin related. He uses medications like serotonin reuptake inhibitors. It's more, so depending on what the patient history is, he tries to determine their genetic burden from that and then use medications. And repeatedly, quite successfully, we do that too. Then we also build counseling interventions around it as well. So, in general, you got to try the human brain is infinitely complex. Everything we're just talking about here, I have made overly simplistic. Even the DRD2 gene, if Kareem Washington was here, he'd be saying, Rick, it's ANK1, and he would explain to you very complicated intricately how they're related. It's very complex, but to keep things simple so we can get down to treatment and a plan and understand and get our brains around it, patients tend to either be motivated by avoiding a negative or having trouble gaining a positive. So we'll work our treatment plans around that. And the negative they tend to feel more often is fear, anxiety, panic, with depression or malaise being second. Or if you want to talk in 12-step terms, you could say, what is it? Oh my gosh, can't believe it's failing on me. Irritable, restless, and discontented. And so which part of that equation that equals irritable, restless, and discontent do you want to focus on as a therapist and I believe in very integrated treatment as a treatment team. So our practice is medically integrated, very medically integrated. And I guess that's unusual.
So I think based on that last comment that you said, about, having integrative approaches, seems like be very good for people to always explore a combination of 12 steps with maybe supplements, some sort of therapy and counseling, and what that combination looks like exactly is really custom, right, to the individual.
Exactly. Now, the problem is, though, Miguel, is how do you find a physician who's trained in addiction? There's very few that are board certified in addiction medicine. Many of those specialize in buprenorphine. That's really what they do. They're buprenorphine practices. How do you find a physician that wants to get involved and take a look at these issues and not over-medicate somebody? Again, we cannot medicate all these problems away. I can't take a person with severe reward deficiency syndrome, give them medications and change them where they act like a normal person. Why would they want to do that anyway? But can some of these medications help? Absolutely. One medication I think is really important, or one thing is really important to track, is corticotropin releasing factor. So George Koob at the NIA and Barbara Scripps, Barbara Mason, they both work at Scripps at the Pearson Institute on Alcoholism. They put a lot of data out there about how important it is to measure corticotropin releasing factor and make sure that it's going down over time. So it tends to peak after someone stops substances around 45 to 90 days, just about the time they're getting out of treatment, the time we see relapse most often, and then it stays elevated for about 18 months. So this seems to be the queen mother of setting off all the neuropeptides, for lack of a better word, in the brain, getting the wrong balance. So this is something that we measure and we want to see it going down. And there's different medications that we use to keep that down. Well, we don't want patients that are turned into zombies. We want them to have reasonable fear.
Yeah. Like using a medication that may subdue like dopamine or something.
Oh yeah. I've had God, it's only happened twice. I've had two patients come to me on dopamine antagonists. There was a new one that came out that was indicated for depression with psychotic features, and both of them relapsed just within weeks. So small sample set, but I'm thinking blocking dopamine in people that have problems with their dopamine system is not a good idea.
And yeah. I have a question, around, you said earlier, and I just wanted to kind of double back, like, helping people with denial. We just did an episode with denial. I'm sorry. We just did an episode on moderation. And people find, as a clinician, spending a lot of time with people who want to moderate versus abstinence. So you spend a lot of time in that space. And when you say it helps people with denial, is it's like just getting the score helps to kind of confirm the diagnosis, or, make them more willing to embrace treatment or abstinence?
Yeah. If somebody has a high genetic burden and they don't quite meet the criteria yet, I feel safe in saying, like, we know how this plays out. Okay. If you continue to use substances, we know where this is going to end up. If you don't learn how emotional regulation techniques, this is going to compound it and make it faster. Trauma, of course, is the rocket fuel that can set everything off. So I don't think trauma causes addiction, but it sure seems to fuel it more often than not. It's defined very broadly. So yeah, I think that helps. Now, when somebody, it's usually the people who are interested in moderation are not my patients. The patients come and they're like, well, the court's taken away my right to drink. So, they pretty much understand that. But when people out there, say they might have a problem, whatever, I'm like, yeah, try moderating, get it out of your system. But you can take this test to find out if you're at risk or not. If you're not at risk, then it's less urgent of a problem. Again, somebody who has a low burden can still develop a problem with any of the addictive processes or substances. It's just going to probably be easier to treat. And they might be, I don't think anybody's researched it, but in my opinion, they'd be much more of a candidate for a moderation program than an abstinence-based program.
So earlier you said that there are people obviously who have the genetic makeup that hints that they're addicts, but there are people that they're almost like fake addicts, right? Like they're struggling with substances, but they don't have the genetic makeup. And they probably don't have the reward system deficiency either. What's going on with those people? Why are they? How did they get into trouble?
I call it, in a few other clinicians and research call it pseudo addiction. It can still be bad. What Ken Blum hypothesizes, and I agree, is that the constant insult, for lack of a better term, of the substances in the brain through homeostasis, the brain starts down regulating. So you're constantly increasing dopamine to super physiological levels. The body in turn becomes more tolerant to dopamine and to other feel good chemicals. And so it becomes more dependent more and more on those substances. But when you can get back to a normal level of functioning, very often those people then a normal level of dopamine detox is what we're talking about basically. Once they get through detox or post-acute withdrawal, then they tend to be able to moderate their emotions more and understand it's like, okay, if I use substances in moderation, I can do that. They can fall back more into that. They don't need to use more because they had a reset.
So let me play this back to you to make sure that I got it. So, I may not be an addict because I don't have the genetic makeup, but I may try something like, say, amphetamines, which will take my dopamine baseline, 1,000x or 1,200,
right.
100x, right? So now in terms of homeostasis, it's going to take me it's going to be much harder for me to get to homeostasis, right? So therefore, but when I do get there, I may be more dopamine hungry. So then I start feeding it again, right? Take me longer to get to homeostasis. So I try to do more of the drug because it's harder and harder. And on top of it, I build tolerance. So now I have that problem, even though I didn't have the genetic makeup. Does that check more or less?
Yeah. In general, that exact same things are happening in both your person with the high genetic burden, the person with a low genetic burden. But the people with the high genetic burden are going to have more of a reinforcing effect, a stronger, more reinforcing, just plain old fashioned B.F. Skinner behaviorism, maybe even Pavlov, Thornton in concept. So
fascinating. But maybe that same person that got into trouble with amphetamines, maybe they had tried something more mild that doesn't really get the dopamine baseline so much out of whack, right? Maybe it wouldn't have been as big of a problem. So the substance itself that one takes, it does something. It makes a difference depending on what you take.
And then the question is like, why did they take that? And so the one substance where I usually see this, somebody with a very low genetic burden who now meets the criteria or has a problem with substance use disorder is pain patients. There was a motivation to they're chasing something with the opiate and they're chasing pain relief. And it is so complicated from a neurophysiological standpoint when that begins to happen, that there's something that drove them to it. I see it more there. Second, I would say alcohol, and that may be the social aspect or some other aspect they were chasing besides the effect of the drug. But a lot of these pain patients, they weren't chasing the euphoric aspect of opiates. They were chasing the pain relief part, the misery relief. Even when they aren't getting it anymore, they keep chasing it. Just like In our operant conditioning boxes in our undergraduate in psychology, the rat keeps hitting that bar even when they're not getting the reward, or even if they're getting the reward spontaneously, just off the memory of the reward. And so that's kind of the difference that I see in general.
So more of an environmental explanation, that led to their addiction was, more like what they were raised in and some of the things that have happened to them since birth.
And in a lot of ways too, that's an easier intervention for the treatment team. When you're dealing with reward deficiency syndrome, you're dealing with a lot of different issues and consequences that have been stacking up. It runs in the family. So now the whole family has issues. You really need to treat the family, not just the patient. So it's a little more complicated.
Are you finding that, a test like this would be beneficial for parents with their children?
A lot of parents are interested in that. The issue, Jeff, is that goes back to, again, when I was in school, I would listen to everything on prevention, and I never saw anything that said, okay, here's how you prevent somebody from becoming an addict when they have the genetic. They can definitely abstain from addictive substances, but does that not mean it might develop in something else? Like a gambling addiction or a sex addiction or a food addiction or a work addiction or achievement addiction, or cluster B personality disorders seem to be very associated with these genes as well. Maybe it'll manifest in that way. So I don't really know what we can do for prevention, but a lot of parents are interested in that.
I think that would be an amazing thing to have for like early teens who are just starting to experiment, and they don't listen to anybody. Maybe they'll listen to some,
they might listen to, it might be like, okay, substances are going to be an issue. I just can't guarantee it won't go into some other issue. Of course, substances are going to have the most legal consequences of anything you can do, I think. But, it might be a way for them to just understand themselves and to try to move towards more positive addictions, for lack of a better term, than negative addictions. I don't know if there is such a thing, but that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. There are less destructive addictions, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like in my case, I think I still struggle with a little bit of my work addiction. But, whenever that shows up, I start thinking, well, out of all the addictions that could be acting out on right now, this is probably the least damaging one.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell my patients all the time when they get, because we have them 3 to 5 years, so we see them through this journey. And, there's the conversation of abstinence is easy compared to moderation. And some things in life, you just got to moderate, like work.
Yeah.
It's going to be a struggle, but it's this advanced treatment kind of recovery issues. A lot of guys, 2-3 years in recovery go, wow, other problems are popping up. I'm like, no kidding, really? Didn't see that coming. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Based on your scores, you probably don't want to be an accountant.
Yeah. It's like, I love all the people like, oh, I'm going to die without my Adderall. I have to have my Adderall. It's like, okay, why? Because I'm ADD. I'm like, no one ever died from ADD. Okay.
That's right.
You don't want to do tedious, boring things. And I get it. So don't become an accountant until you can get some moderate, but you're probably never going to be somebody that loves tedious, boring things.
Right. Okay. So since you mentioned Adderall and ADD, I do want to ask you a question. Well, first of all, the Adderall was one of the drugs that I struggled the most at the very end of my journey in active addiction. It was the hardest to kick out for me, even compared to cocaine and alcohol and other things that I did. So I just mentioned that, to be clear. And so because of that experience, I really question how much Adderall is prescribed and, how much people should take it. And I say, what's your opinion on the whole Adderall for ADD, ADHD?
Oh, man. So the diagnosis of ADD or ADHD, the diagnosis seems to be a little more definitive, but the broad interpretation. So I have a friend who kind of works in the medical field. They're having some behavioral issues with his son, took him to the pediatrician, had the parents do a 1-page screener and said, yep, that's ADD, and wrote the kid a prescription of alcohol. No. Goodness gracious, no. There needs to be a full psyche eval.
Yeah.
It needs to be very thorough. I don't like just jumping right to the medication. Let's see how this works. Without looking at, another thing is look at the genetic burden. I mean, ask the parents, how many alcoholics and addicts do you have in your family tree? They may not know or may not want to say, but at least get an idea. You better be very, very, same thing when we prescribe opiates. The question is really for me, how many addicts and alcoholics are in the family? That should impact what medication is chosen. There are non-addictive ADD medications. Why not try those first? They're not going to have as big an impact, but they're there. But actually, this child of a friend actually did really well on the D&L phenylalanine. Seemed to, just taking that seemed to really turn him around. Now, was it a placebo effect? Who knows? Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Earlier, it's kind of switching gears a little bit to something you said earlier, which really caught my attention. You sort of simplified things very nicely. You said that there's people in two camps, basically the people that don't want to deal with the negative. You know, they're always sort of limited to the positive, don't want to deal with the negative. And then there's the people that can find the positive, right? They're stuck in the negative, basically. What's going on in each one of those camps from a brain perspective? Like what's going on the, don't want the negative, and what's happening with the people that are having a hard time looking at the positive?
That's a good question. I have not seen data, only have practical experience with this. So I would say on the people that are more interested in escaping the negative, when we do quantitative EEGs on them, we see more anxiety activity. That's one marker that we see there. So there's something going on. And then they tend to have the GABRB3 gene variant, which tends to affect GABA. I think they also probably have something going on with some gene that is messing up glutamate use as well, but I can't find any tests that works. So that's what I think is going on. It's more that the ones that have the trouble, that are always having trouble seeking that and experiencing positivity, it seems to be more dopamine mediated. So, and one of the biggest therapeutic tricks in the world for the people that are having trouble experiencing a reward is gratitude lists. I mean, it is magic what just having someone, hey, once a week, write down 5 things that you're grateful for. Before the meeting, before your home group AA meeting starts, write 5 things in your big book in the margins that you're grateful for. And it can have a big impact. That goes to positive psychology.
Interesting. There's a gentleman, Paul Anti. He's an author and psychiatrist, and he basically reduced the whole idea of, so to answer the question, what are the pillars of mental health? He reduced it to 2 things. One is agency and the other one is gratitude. And he actually does a very deep dive on all that. But I find that very interesting because it helps me a lot at a personal level. Just I do a daily gratitude journal every morning, and I know I had a really bad day, and I start with having a bad day. I get to the gratitude. I'm like, okay, I don't have a bad day anymore. You know, I'm good to go. It's just out of your funk.
It's sort of a powerful mindset to be grateful and to be receiving positives for what we already have versus looking externally for more and more. And, you know, I tell patients this, I tell everybody who has this disorder is like, look, when it gets down to it, there's not enough good stuff in the world to keep you feeling okay. Because of hedonic adjustment, it's eventually not going to be enough. It has to be an inside job.
Mm-hmm.
You can't win the lottery every day and have the effect that you're looking for. It's going to wear off. So let's quit, because a lot of people come, I need this external issue handled. I need this handled. I want this. I need this promotion, whatever it's not going to work. And they're shocked. I'm like, you'll feel better for a while and then you won't.
Yeah. Well, for me, I found through my recovery journey that for me, that was one of my biggest problems, that I was just looking for excitement and happiness on everything external. And it was an endless chase that was never going to end until the day that I died. Right. So if I had a good job, I wanted a better job. If I was making good money, I wanted to make more money. If I was a VP of engineering, I wanted to be CTO. If I was a CTO, I wanted to be, I don't know, whatever comes after. And it was this endless chase until I found 12 steps, and 12 steps just got me out of that thought loop of looking for reward outside. And like you said, it's become an inside job now.
Achievement is very addictive. Very, in my opinion. A lot of people, unfortunately, maybe haven't ever achieved enough to feel that, but my gosh, it's very addictive to us and our big giant egos. I have to be very, very careful of that all the time. I don't personally want to be addicted to achievement. That's not going to end well for me.
No, it doesn't. It is not rewarding at all. It's more pain than reward, to be honest. So
having somebody who's, especially if they're rather new in recovery, they look, happiness is an inside job. And they're just, what are you talking about? It comes from within. It's not going to come without. But, and by the way, we mentioned 12 steps several times, and the truth is that is the best pathway. John Kelly's data, John Kelly and Keith Humphreys from Stanford, John Kelly out of Harvard, and I forget the third author. They did a meta-analysis, a study of all the studies for people who are not sure what a meta-analysis is. And they looked at all the best therapy methods and all the best ways to maintain sobriety. And I think they were also looking through in a roundabout way about emotional sobriety as well as abstinence. And what they found was that the best way to do it is with 12-step programs and 12-step facilitation. And that's it. And nothing else really trended that well. Kind of CBT a little bit, but in general, it was kind of a mic drop moment. Unfortunately, that's giant study that really, when you look at all the studies that went into it, was millions and millions of dollars. I calculated about $36 million went into creating that study. It came out in March of 2020, the same month COVID came out, the COVID. And it just didn't get the traction it's kind of okay to say, look, there are many pathways to recovery. And when you figure them out, let me know, because this is really the only one. It's, as you're kind of out there exploring it, but you're going to have to get something very close to it. Why reinvent the wheel? If you've got some issue with 12-step engagement or 12-step program, a lot of people just think 12-step program is the meeting. It's not the meeting. It's a very well laid out program of action, based around helping others. And a lot of people miss that part. You know, like we talked about, our groups like Jeff and I see our even, one of the great things about Precision is that we developed this therapeutic community where it's very homogeneous. People are very similar. They get each other. And there's a lot of healing in there. Something just, when they walk in the room, there's no judgment. When I was treating multiple people, multiple problems. So, I'd have somebody maybe with 7 DWIs in a process group with a 28-year-old meth addict. And the meth addict be looking at the guy and just finally be honest and ask the 45-year-old man with 7 DWIs, why did you do that? What's wrong with you? How did that happen? I would never do that. I'm a meth addict, but I would never drive. What are you thinking? And so there was always judgment. There was always just and yet we understand and we heal in a interpersonal context. And that's really the core of the 12 steps. It's really about one drunk helping another. And it works. Why reinvent the wheel?
When you had mentioned that your program is 3 to 5 years, my reaction was awesome. Like that's, it takes, I think it takes guts to put a program out there that takes 3 to 5 years. Everyone wants instant result, but to put out a program that's realistic, there's nothing instant about this. Recovery takes work and dedication, commitment. Yeah.
I actually got this from Mark Lundell, but, the first year is really about recovery capital. The second year we began to get into psychological, and the third year we began to get into emotional. A little self-actualization at the end too. But that arc in general, some people can get there quicker and some people can't. But to walk into a treatment program, that's 30 days long and say, hey, we're going to work on your emotional issues and your trauma. I don't know about that. I like having 3 years to get to it.
You'll be a spiritual being when you leave in 28 days.
It's, it works for some people, but I think it's having the guidance and the accountability along the way over years. Again, the American Pilots Association proved this. Well, that program has been going since the 70s with a very high, very, very, very high success rate. They claim anywhere from 87 to 95% of these pilots never drink again when they complete the program. So, and it's longitudinal. It's been studied, for going on for more than 40 years. I should say too, so my father was an airline pilot who retired from Trans World Airlines, and he was a union rep. So I was exposed to the HIMSS program from grade school. And I've thought, like, why doesn't everybody get something like that? That's strange. It seems to work really well.
Yeah. That commitment to long term, like recovery takes work and it takes time and it takes patience, which is addicts aren't, historically good at. But like telling you right from the beginning, like this is going to be I think that's one of the things that people really push back on 12 seconds, like, oh, like it's forever thing. Like we have to come forever and we're always going to be coming. And it's like, well, there's definitely a point where you don't have to come, you want to come, and it becomes part of who you are. You understand what you're tapping into.
The genes are forever. Now, we can talk about gene editing.
Wow. Yeah. That's a whole nother.
That's a whole other issue. Gene editing is happening in humans now. Will we get there in behavioral issues? Probably. A lot of people ask me, will it be a cure? I don't think so. I don't think you can unexperience what you experience. Will it help some people? I think it'll help. Will it cure addiction? I don't think so. I think once you've experienced it, you can't unexperience something once you've experienced it. Heard a lecturer one time say Wernicke's cures alcohol. Really? What? He goes, yeah, they can't remember what gets them drunk. Cures alcoholism. Okay. So unless you could erase all the behavioral reinforcement from the brain through genetic editing, which isn't going to happen. And then it gets very controversial too. Kaylin Page Hardens, she's also at University of Texas, wrote the book, The Genetic Lottery, where she's really talking about behavioral genetics. And she received a lot of hate from woke colleagues when she was at a think tank in New York, of them thinking somehow it was a anti-social justice issue to imply that there are genes that predict things like intelligence and success. And there are also genes that predict addiction and these other issues. And, she wrote a really good book called, The Genetic Lottery. And so that's where we're headed. This looking at behavioral genes, I think it's really the future. And I think, the genetic counselors are going to have to get more involved with the substance use disorder counselor, the National Association of Alcohol and Drug Addiction Counselors, and American Society of Addiction Medicine help us work through these techniques they've developed for physiological issues as we move into the psychological.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the whole question of people asking, hey, is there going to be a cure? And one of the things that I sort of talk about with people in my 12-step fellowship is we got to accept ourselves for who we are as we came in, as addicts, with our genetic makeup and everything, is sort of like milk the advantages of it, because there are some, right? If you just come to complete acceptance, right, and surrender of who you are, you start seeing the advantages of being that somebody. So instead of trying to fight it, try to cure it, just go with it. And when you start going with it, that first of all, you have to be working on your 12 steps. You have to have a system to address it, right? And if you're deep in that system, I think you get to cool practices that take you way further than you ever imagined. I speak for myself, like for instance, because of recovery, I started meditating. So now I have a daily meditation practice, and I do 30 minutes meditation every day. So if it hadn't been for recovery, if it hadn't been for addiction, I wouldn't have been in recovery. If it hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have found meditation. And now meditation has given me a lot of gifts way beyond anything that I imagined. But I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for the whole sort of addiction journey. And I think, it kind of embraced it in a way. It's like, oh, wow, like I love it. I'm grateful that I'm an addict because I wouldn't have found these things.
Me personally, my life was absolutely miserable before recovery. With intermittent episodes of euphoria and peace, but just absolute chaos and misery, always working for the next thing, never happy. To find my tribe and people that get me and like me and I like them, and to be attached to them and try to understand, really what a positive attachment is, because I'm not really sure I ever had them. Is just amazing. I wouldn't, because people ask me like, okay, because I know the people who are working on next generation genetic editing, and like, yeah, this is doable. We could change these genes that drive the disorder. And they asked, would you do it? I'm like, I don't think so. And we saw this with the deaf community too, with cochlear implants. Some of them are like, no, this is my identity. This is who I am. I'm a person who's impaired or has impaired hearing or can't hear at all. This is who I am, and I'm okay. I'm at peace with it. And so are my friends. And I don't want to be a hearing person. And I understand this. Like, there were some real arguments in families about this. I can get it, but for me, it's like, this is who I am. I'm doing pretty well, and I'm happier than I've ever been in my life for quite some time now. And I don't really want to mess with it. And the same thing for the people that are so afraid their kids are going to get the addiction gene. It's not a gene, it's a bunch of genes. Who cares? I have two sons who are in long-term recovery. It's great. Treatment works and recovery happens. If they get the right treatment, this is a completely treatable disorder. And like we talked about, these are pro-evolutionary genes. There are advantages to having these genes. And there are certain occupations and activities that people with these genes excel at. And that's usually where we see them. Now, I can't tell you how many trauma and ER nurses I've treated. They gravitate to it and they're good at it. Because when the 7-car pileup comes into the ER, they're in their element. While everybody's losing it, they're cool.
I love the chaos. Yeah. I was for the last 7 years before I went back into private practice, I was the clinical director at a rehab, a big rehab. And it was just chaos. Every day was chaos. But I was like, once I got there, I was calm. I was just like, handled everything in a way. It's like, this is my own. This is who I.
And normal people who are hearing us are absolutely confused and terrified.
Yeah.
Sure.
What? Chaos at a rehab? Yes, sometimes hospitals and treatment centers become chaotic. Yes, that happens.
Yeah. And you start talking about opiate addicts and coming into rehab and being a little difficult. I was like, yeah.
Oh yeah. I miss working with opiate addicts. I haven't. That's a whole other episode.
Early recovery, when it comes to this, kind of dopamine deficiency or dysfunction or, anything right up the bat that people can do that you think would help that, because you have the deficiency, but you're also feeling your dopamine's really, depending on the drug. But any drug's going to influence dopamine. Is there anything early in recovery that people could focus on to kind of help with that? Or is there, gratitude list, I think is the number one idea.
How early are we defining early recovery?
Just after detox, like, but 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, anything, it's tough times. Yeah.
So glutamate's off the chart, GABA activity's off the chart, that post-acute withdrawal. Why in the world that's not in the DSM too? Why can we not diagnose somebody with post-acute withdrawal syndrome? It has symptoms, what you're looking at, but there's no code for it. Is mainly what I see is about getting the brain to calm down. And so, Las Vegas recovery, Mel Pohl, lucky I had lunch with him twice. And he showed that he could reduce pain levels exactly 50% by helping people calm their mind. And so when we were working in detox, that was really, as a therapist, I'm like, how do I help this person calm? They don't trust anybody. They're terrified. They don't know why or what. They will assign the negative emotion they're feeling to anything in their environment. How do we all get centered, calm, and help them calm their brain? And I think that's what I would focus on early. What are the mindfulness meditation techniques you can do, deep breathing techniques you can do, medications that can be used, supplements that can be used? Not a fan of weight resistance exercise, but if they're at all possible to be able to do aerobic exercise, I think the data is great on that, at lowering the stress hormones, increasing the vasopressin, things like that, increasing substance P, lowering the other stress hormones and stress neuropeptides is really the key. But it's hard, right? Then everything becomes, all the consequences become real, but the brain is saying, we are under attack. We are dying. Do something. Spring into action. That's what the amygdala is screaming past the prefrontal cortex. Do something. What are you doing, dummy? We're dying. The person's supposed to just be sober and help them get as much inner peace and calm in their brain as possible to be more focused. And it's really important that the staff be more emotionally contained than the patients.
Great point. Yeah, that's a really great point. And the environment of the facility, just the whole temperament of the staff in this facility can make or break a facility, or make or break someone's recovery. Some facilities, have great staffs. And I think that's a big part of looking for rehabs and looking for inpatient services, is to find a rehab where you can kind of get an idea what the staff is like in the facility, the temperament of the facility is like,
Yeah. Have you ever noticed, Jeff, how franchises of treatment centers have never really worked? It's each facility is unique, and it's because it's really the people. You can't clone the people and, make one facility. It's really dependent on the people who work there. They're giving the care, and that's the most important part.
That makes sense. A lot of sense.
And, early on, what do they want? They just want somebody to sit with them in the emotion. They can't usually say that or understand it or hold it, but what they're craving is somebody to just sit there with them in the emotion.
And that's what you tend to remember. You don't remember the swimming pool or the great food. You remember that. You remember the time that you had that, maybe as a 5 or 10 minute conversation with someone, you're really connected to that person. They really heard you and you felt safe.
That I'm a big believer in polyvagal theory. And I think just, when the vagus system of two people connect and they have a shared experience, that's the healing. I don't think we're ever going to fit that into a pill or an injection.
Right. Definitely. That's where the whole sponsor-sponsee relationship works so well, right? Just one addict helping another addict.
I think physiologically it probably works, and definitely wouldn't work without the vagus system. Vagus system, I see it like an antenna that lets people connect to each other. One antenna broadcasting the other, and they're in a closed circuit right there. Now we sound like a bunch of hippies, but
that's all right.
Okay, there's a lot of science behind it. Go talk to Stephen Forges and his wife. There's a lot of science behind it.
Well, one thing that I really enjoyed that you brought up is that meta study that concluded that 12 steps is sort of like the best treatment that we know of today. Why? So the way that I interpret 12 steps is, it's one path to get to some level of spiritual awakening. At least that's what happened with me. And it's like the burning bush or anything like that, that's not what I mean by spiritual awakening. It's like you become spiritually connected and you develop some sort of spiritual practice in the way that you understand spirituality. So how important, based on that, premise, how important do you think spirituality is in this whole equation of addiction?
I mean, I think it's incredibly important. It's just a best practice. I see people without spirituality struggle in recovery all the time. And I think, again, it goes to that vagus system that usually early in recovery, someone connects to somebody else. Maybe, Jeff's patient connects to Jeff, or two people in recovery connect to each other. A sponsor connects to the sponsee. And then through the 12-step program, they begin to connect to a higher power, to something that's not them. They tapped into something. And there's a million things on what that may be, and it may be everything. And then lastly, at the higher levels, they begin to connect to themselves. To get to that journey, though, I don't really think a patient can just skip from not being connected at all to connected to self. It has to be that connection to another person. And many have never really had true positive attachment. You can't feel it. Their vagus, and substances do a number on the vagus system as well, or the way the vagus system goes into the brain. By the way, for people who don't know, vagus system is 10th cranial nerve, comes out of the back of the head and goes through all your extremities and every organ of your body, wraps around your face. And it's about 95% ether. It sends information to the brain, but it's also the way the brain regulates organs, et cetera, and sweating, et cetera. But it's very important. It's why we feel emotion in our body, or that connection to another person is really maybe mostly body based, to feel that positive connection, meaning with the person, and then on to a higher power through the 12-step programs usually, and then back to self.
Right. Feel like, I don't know if you'll agree with this or not, but my naive sort of view also in 12 steps is that because of the work, if you have a rigorous sponsor, that is like the work that you start doing and it gets on a cadence, it's also almost like a path to neuroplasticity, I feel like. Mm-hmm. Because, you're going into these constant loops of work, and you get a bit of a reward because you went to the next step, right? So that, I'm assuming that sort of ignites some level of neuroplasticity.
Yeah. Jeff Sandos, I highly recommend you guys have him on the show. He talks a lot in his presentations and in his book about the damage that substances do to the brain, the damage and the problems from these genes, the damage and the problems through the stress and trauma that we've had, and how even 12 steps and other things involved around 12 steps helps with the neuroplasticity and the brain repair.
Fascinating.
So I really, really hope soon we can use neurofeedback, maybe even TMS, more widely to repair that, fix those issues. But the decision-making problems we see even after somebody's 6, 7, even a year sober, I think neuroscientists, please forgive me, I think it's the insular cortex that's damaged, and they don't make wise decisions. Decision-making is not there. Thank God for 12-steps groups and sponsors.
Yeah. Right. You had mentioned before we came on about, biomarkers that can be tracked. And you mentioned some of that,
oh boy. Right now, just a handful. So we got the genetic biomarkers that show that somebody's at risk for different substance use disorders and other psychiatric issues. We've got corticotropin releasing factor, which seems to be a good biomarker of post-acute withdrawal, for lack of a better term. And that's pretty much it. That's all I know. We use quantitative EEGs to see if we're getting the calming effect in the brain. I think that Ken McCauley showed it's not even that new anymore, a new radiology instrument that actually can show signaling, where you're seeing the VTA and the amygdala overpower the signaling the prefrontal cortex. He believes that's how we'll diagnose addiction in the future. We can see that. And you can, if you see his slides, they're amazing. You can literally see this red line in somebody in active addiction of the signaling from the want part of the brain overpowering the judgment part of the brain. And then he shows a healthy normal, and it looks like a pink dotted sort of line. And you can it's beautiful visual. So the future holds more than we have right now. Right now, we've got gene testing, we've got corticotropin releasing factor there, and then it's speculative after that. Inflammation definitely seems to be a biomarker, but what type of inflammation are we measuring? When are we measuring it? What are we looking for? I don't know. I'm glad that we're finally beginning to get these quantitative empiric methods into treatment to help the providers figure out what's going on. Oh, I shouldn't forget. We have urine drug testing. It's still important. It's like catching the horse after it's out of the barn, but
it's also that part of that acceptance, serenity prayer, like the part of the acceptance. Like you have to, part of this you have to accept. Like this is how you're built. And it just, like I said, like it becomes that thing that like knowing that there's a certain part of you that is this way and you are built this way. And you need to kind of accept that and kind of work that into your recovery. Like there's certain things that you may never be, but there's certain things that, are a real advantage. Like I really appreciate, some of the things that I know that are benefits to being, having some of these impulses and this impatience and, is that like I do get really involved in things and I do get really intensely like passionate about things, which is, there's nothing the matter with that, sometimes, but sometimes I gotta like bring my brain back. It's like, okay. Now we got to go back to work and we got to do things that we're responsible for. But I have this ability to let my brain loose on things,
Absolutely. My brother actually made this observation about me about a year ago. He goes, when you get into a subject, you never half do it. You are all in. I got into wristwatches and neurology and apparently what that means is I get other people into it as well. Another affliction. And then, but he's like, wow. So now I got him into it. He's like, wow, why do you do this to people? I don't know. I'm passionate. When I find something works, I get very passionate about it. And I was like, yeah, most normal people aren't like that. Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, most normal.
Every single evaluation that I've done for ADHD, it comes up pretty high. So I'm pretty confident that, I struggle with ADHD. I have my whole life, and I'm okay with it. One thing that helped me a lot is a book named The ADHD Advantage, written by a psychiatrist who himself has ADHD. He has a bunch of, in different chapters, he pulls in different like CEOs and successful people that have ADHD and talks about how they cope with it to do boring things like catch up with your email, for instance. So how to cope with it, but then also how to tap into the advantages that it has. So that book was really helpful for me, about 5 years ago. And I keep thinking, man, somebody's going to write the book, The Addict Advantage.
Oh yeah. Let's do it. Yeah. Well, Jeff's saying like, how do people embrace this? And I'm like, well, first of all, as stigma gets better, I think that most people are more likely to embrace the fact they have this issue. And I think as we can show it's more of a biologically driven issue or a genetically driven issue, they're going to be able to accept it more as well. And then the pro-adaptive standpoint, I tell people this all the time. I think Western civilization, if not the entire world, would collapse without addicts. I don't think it would exist without addicts. When you look at the United States, what is the United States built from? It's from people who came from other places. This was a high adrenaline sport, to cross the ocean in a rickety boat, either from Asia or from Europe, and then carve a civilization out of the wilderness. Same thing for the people that migrated from the South. When they got here, it's like, oh, welcome to the desert. This was they had to be very unhappy where they were to take a risk to go and try to get something better against great odds. And so I look at the issues with substance use disorder in the founding fathers of the United States. Look at Ben Franklin and his opiate issues and all the alcohol issues. And people didn't live that long too back then. That's another issue. It was like, oh yeah, he's a drunk, but it doesn't matter. He won't live that long.
Yeah. And also the Spaniards that came to the whole Mexico territory, they were a bunch of alcoholics too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they introduced all their stuff that's bad to the indigenous people. It is what it is. But, I mean, again, what if you took out all the people with reward deficiency syndrome off the planet? Would we have any trauma nurses left? Would what would it do to firefighters and police and a lot of people with the issue, or, maybe they haven't developed substance use disorder yet or won't, but they definitely have the characteristics to do it. So again, I think these genes are very important in society. So that is not a very Reaganite, just say no, drugs are bad, those evil foreigners sending their evil white powder to kill our children message that I grew up with.
Yeah, which is awesome, right? I love this segment that we're sort of going through, because I think one of the goals of the podcast is to really inform people in ways where we help removing the stigma that we have of addiction and the addict and whatnot. Because I think if stigma is less, then more people are going to be willing to get help for themselves. And I say that, again, speaking for myself, because I was a very functional addict. And when you're a functional addict, it's a bit of a lie that you're telling yourself, right? Because, the data that you have is like, well, I'm successful, so therefore I must not be an addict, right? But if once you start deep diving, you realize you are, it's easier to admit if there's no stigma, right? It's easier for somebody to say, no, you know what? I am an addict and I think I need help. But because of this stigma, it's easier to want to hide it and not admit to it because you feel shame.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the biggest barriers to entry, besides the emotional attachment to the substance. Is the shame. I don't want to be one of those people. And, I grew up in the war on drugs. Nixon really got it going. President Carter and President Ford were not going to go there, especially President Ford with his wife having her own own issues. But then, Ronald Reagan weaponized it and saw it as a way to attack the left without directly attacking them, and to give us a common internal enemy. It was very political. Richard Nixon was a centrist, and he had to attack the edges without upsetting the base in the middle. And so there were many political reasons why we went for this. And we, basically said, hey, if you're an addict or an alcoholic, you're a bad person. You're hurting our country. We don't want you. There's no place for you. One time in Michigan, you could actually get a longer sentence for crack cocaine possession than for murder. It just got unhinged with what we've done. So our society just picked this particular group of people and what they do and just demonized it. And so when we're talking to people now, and I think a lot of younger people we've moved beyond that and they're not exposed to it, but their parents are so indoctrinated that we were literally indoctrinated with propaganda that addicts are bad people and that they chose this. I was in court the other day where a judge actually said, well, addiction to alcoholism is the only disease that somebody can give themselves. Just like, oh, come on, please, man. Oh, it hurt my heart. I'm like, oh my gosh. Where do you even start to deprogram? The guy's probably in his 70s. Put on my to-do list. I go meet with him and try to convince him he's completely wrong. Something I just wanted that we started talking about and I didn't finish was when I walked out of treatment, it was like, what causes addiction? Couldn't get the answer. And so I came up with something called the addiction equation and I talked to Kevin McCulley about this and Jeff Sandos and Ken Blum and every expert, Mike Sprintz, you name it. If somebody is published in the field or an expert in the field, I went up and talked to them about this and they all agree. It's like, yeah, we don't really have a way to communicate what causes addiction. And I looked at it as an equation. So addiction is an equation where you have 4 factors, 4 variables added together. And if you had a hypothetical number, that would equal addiction. And the equation was genes plus epigenetics, which we're just getting into. They're doing some great work with that at University of Texas about how our genes are changed, activated, turned on, damaged through the environment. Exposure to the reward, that could be taking away a negative or gaining a positive, all of the things back to good old fashioned B.F. Skinner behaviorism. It could be an activity like gambling, or it could be a substance like crack cocaine, but exposure to that, the behaviorism, the reward. And the last one, socioeconomic, just happen to acknowledge Bruce Alexander's work. It's not the be all cure all that a lot of people believe that putting an addict in a perfect environment cures addiction. But we do know the environment, low stress environments definitely help addiction, and the bad environments can increase those other variables or exposure there too. And so without those four factors being being involved, that's the perfect storm when those things happen. I'd say, you could add in trauma, but that's really more of like in the environment than outside environments, something traumatic happened. But it's not always present, but it usually is. And that's kind of like the exponent to the equation. So I said that we need something that fits on a bumper sticker. So from pharma, I don't know if you noticed, a lot of our messages are very, very short and repetitive. I'm one of those evil big pharma guys. Trust me. By the way, on the evil big pharma guys, I never once was at a meeting where I was like, how do we really hurt people and screw them over? Yeah, let's do that to make money. That never happened, by the way. A lot of hate going out to big pharma when it's like, I never saw people intentionally doing things that would harm people. But we were very good at making very complicated messages very clear and easy to remember. And so that addiction creation became the bumper sticker. Like, let's start here. This is what causes it. And begins to break down the denial, with genes being very important.
Right. No, I love that. That's awesome. Have you written anything around the equation, like a blog or?
Have I written anything about it? I don't think that has ever gotten in. Well, it's definitely in presentations that have been presented to National Association of Alcohol and Drug Addiction Counselors several times. In some of the state conventions, I don't think I've ever written anything about it. Okay.
I was asking because if you did, it would be nice to send to the viewers as something they can go check out.
Jeff Sandos's textbook starts out with a conversation. We had this conversation of the addiction equation, and we just began talking where we literally scheduled a meeting where we just started talking this through over and over and over. And eventually we ended up with, we need to write a book. And I was like, I'm too busy to write a book, but he did write a book. And the whole book is kind of based on that conversation around the addiction equation.
And what is the title of the book?
What is Jeff calling the title of his book? That's a good question. I don't know. I can't remember. I could probably look it up.
We'll find it. No worries.
Part of the reason we wanted the book was I used to consult a lot with the substance use disorder program at the college here in San Antonio, and he, of course, is at Troy University. We're like, we don't really have the textbook we're looking for. We're sending people out to be treatment providers, but not really having the understanding that they need because it's not explained. So from the equation, Jeff goes on to say, okay, these are the issues all the way to different types of treatment and interventions and why they work. So it kind of starts with the equation and moves out from there.
It's like a great book. Well, I think we're coming to our end here of time. So first of all, thank you for sharing all this time with us. It's a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. And I could keep going for another hour easily. But I guess we have to stop at some point.
This is what we do at national conventions. We just get together and talk for hours and hours.
It's awesome. It sounds fun.
Yeah, I can imagine, like you said, like my brain can dive into things. Right now, it's totally dove into this, so I'm gonna have to way to kind of de-escalate myself.
Right
after that. you know, to kind of.
I didn't mean to activate your vagus system, Jeff. Sorry about that.
I can be productive for my client.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I thoroughly appreciate this.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and
Thank you.
It's always great to be able to get into these things. I hope more conversations like this take place where people start really thinking about the science and getting back to how do we do this better? Why do we have to say we're doing this okay?
Let's kill it. Let's kill it.
I say that all the time. It's like, well, there's about 20 million people in active substance use disorder and about 20 million people in the United States in recovery. If everybody would find one person, we'd be done.
Mm-hmm.
So why aren't we thinking like that? Why aren't we working towards that end goal of eradication? Why are we like, 60%? That's not good enough. Why are we looking like 95%?
100%. I agree with you. And I hope that, through the podcast, we plant enough seeds that maybe it moves the needle even a little bit.
Who knows? Maybe the next great researcher will see this and be started to move on and come up with the next big breakthrough. Who knows?
Again, thank you so much for your time. This was a lovely, lovely conversation, interesting, and we took a lot of nice turns here and there. Any last words you want to say?
Not that I can think of. Just, again, it gets down to it. This is a genetically driven brain disease, but treatment works and recovery happens, and people can go on to amazing lives with this.
Well, thank you very much.
We as a country, we've got to do better.
Agreed.
We as a treatment field, we in the research field, we've got to do better. We've got to suit up and show up and do better. We're losing too many lives, and too many people are living a life not worth living. And we need to take responsibility and step up and do it better.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much, Rick.
You're welcome, guys. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
I'll keep an eye on what's going on with you at Precision Recovery.
That's a whole other show. Yeah, it's going well. Talk to you later, Joe.